Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
Howdy folks, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Nerdstalgic podcast with me, your host Luke. Hope you're doing well, hope you're all good as per usual. We're back with another book review. This one's not going to be as long as Ready Player One and Ready Player Two. Mainly the reason that was so long is because I have such love and passion for the first book and so much distaste and ungrueling hatred, shall I say, for the second book. But to hear my full thoughts and views on that one, check out last week's episode. But this week's episode won't be as long. This one's kind of a bit silly. To be honest, I was actually thinking about holding off of doing this one until Halloweenish. I was thinking, well, I won't give the jibe away, but I was thinking about doing some Halloween stuff for, when October comes. But I figured, you know what? I talk about it now. It's a short review, and then I can post about it in October again and hopefully get a few more views because it's all about the downloads. It's about the passion, really. But as you can tell, I'm in a good mood. I've had a good day today, so I figured, because usually I record early in the morning, but I figured I'm currently recording at 33 minutes past 8 or 8:33, if you want to be more specific, in the afternoon. And like I said, I love to create. I love doing these, so I figured it's only going to be a short episode. Instead of doing it tomorrow, which would be a Friday, give myself the day after tomorrow, a day full of reading and all the other creative things that I want to do, and get this one out of the way early. So, before I get into this short review and me talking about my history of this type of book genre, first I've got to do some business. So, it's business as usual. Yeah, I finally got it out. It's business as usual. If you've listened to the podcast for the past couple of weeks, you will know that the fantastical, yeah, that's a word, and wonderful people at World of Books have kindly sponsored the show as well as sponsored this episode. So thank you to them. And within doing so, they've given me a promo code, which is Nerdy10, that you can use at the checkout. If you want to buy books from them, vinyl, video games, that sort of thing, it'll give you a whopping 10% off your order. So the more you buy, the higher, the more that is saved. I don't know. I'm not very good at maths, right? I'm dyslexic, but I just know 10% off is a fantastic deal, and you can get that by using, again, the discount code Nerdy10. That's Nerdy, all capital letters, NERDY 10 at checkout for 10% off for your next purchase. So thank you to World of Books for doing just that. And on to the topic. So as you can tell, I'm in a very good mood. You can tell when I'm in a good mood. Well, I'm always in a good mood, but you can tell when I'm in a really good mood because I get very tongue-tied, because I get very excited and you could say overreaction a bit to what I'm talking about, and I tend to get all sort of tongue-tied and I stutter a lot. So I do apologize for that when it appears, but I'm just really excited. I love doing these sort of things. So I'm going to try to funnel that excitement into the topic, and instead of babbling on and waffling, I'm going to get straight into it. So today, recently I finished the book that I'm going to be reviewing today, which is The Zombie Survival Guide by Max Brooks. I quite like survival guide sort of books. I've read quite a few in the past, mostly Bear Grylls, but I've read quite a few sort of survival game books. I mostly call them couch survivalists, who is basically somebody like me who feels that they can read these survival books about surviving any situation, in a desert, in the rainforest, in the jungle, whatever. They read these books and they go, oh yeah, I've read these books and I can survive. No, I won't. But I like to think that I can, because I've read a book by Bear Grylls or Ray Mears and that sort of thing. I feel like I can do it. So I class myself as one of them coach survivalists, where like I don't want the shit to hit the fan, but if the shit ever did hit the fan, I kind of know what I'm doing. Most likely I would try my best to stay calm, but I probably would end up panicking and get myself killed anyway. But I have read a few, just to kind of list off a few. So I've only got two here. Like to be honest, a lot of these books you tend to read them once and then you kind of get rid of them because you need space for more books. So I only actually have two anymore. But I've got Extreme Foods by Bear Grylls. This one self-explanatory. To be honest, my sister got me this one, and it's a kind of a step-by-step guide of like if you're in the situation of how to catch certain food, how to cook certain food, and what certain sort of things you can eat. So like it goes from the basics to catching how to set traps, certain traps for in the river, in traps on the ground, traps in the trees, that sort of thing for catching birds and fish and rabbit and so on and so forth. Then it goes as far as the kind of fungus you can eat, so what kind of mushrooms you can eat, what mushrooms you should stay away from, because when it comes to mushrooms, if you don't know, leave them alone because mushrooms can kill you. A lot of people just don't know that, but any sort of type of mushroom can seriously make you ill. And it goes as far as to tell you how to do a fire, and how to cook it, and how to prepare it, and how to know if it's cooked or not. And even, like I say, it goes as far as you know with Bear Grylls, if you really are hungry, you will eat an insect or insects, and what insects you can eat and where to find them. It's a fantastic survival book. My sister got it me because she knows I like these sort of things, so she got it me for Christmas a couple of years ago, and I devoured it within a week or two. But again, I like to class myself as one of these couch sofa sort of adventurers. Not that I'd ever do any of these things. I've never done camping, but I've always wanted to do camping, going out adventuring. Never done it, but I would always love to do it. Maybe one day. But I feel like I've done mountaineering, ish kind of thing. I've gone hiking, that sort of thing. It's not the same. I haven't stayed out there. I've kind of just gone, all day out, all day back, that sort of thing. And kind of, but I'm back in sort of a hotel, like at home sort of thing before, it gets too dark. But even so, I'd love to do the whole survival thing at least once in my life to say I did it and I didn't die. And the next one, this one I got mainly on a whim, kind of as the fact of it. It was one of the newer sort of books that Bear Grylls had released, and this one was like, it's called How to Stay Alive: The Ultimate Survivor Guide for Any Situation, and I got it because it has any situation in it. If I go to the contents part of it, I'm just going to breeze through this. I'm not going to give you everything because obviously these are not the books that I'm talking about here today, but these are just examples. So you've got survival skills, the basics, it goes how to assemble life-saving backpacks, how to make a fire, extinguish fire, how to survive getting lost, how to survive the desert, how to survive an earthquake, a nuclear holocaust, kidnapping, bear attack, dog attack, shark attack, how to avoid blisters, how to treat a burn, uh, how to how to do field dressing for broken bones, how to treat um, a how to treat frostbite, that sort of thing. Some of these things that I already know. When I was in school, I was I never was in the Scouts or the Cubs. I wanted to be, but I never got the chance to. But when I was in senior school, I got the opportunity to do YFA, which is a Young Firefighters Association, because I wanted to be a firefighter when I grew up. That's a completely different story. I'll maybe one day I'll get into that thing. But I did train with the fire service, and I got my first aid qualification. That I was a fully trained first aider. I still know how to do majority of it. I just don't have my sort of qualification anymore, because when you do first aid, you have to do it. You have to basically do the test every year, because sometimes the techniques change, and also it's to kind of make sure that you, as the first aider, you are up to date, that you know what you're doing. Because when I learned, it was the fact of when you do CPR, you do the compressions, you do about 20 or so compressions to staying alive, and then you tilt the head back with your two fingers, and then with your other hand you put it over their nose, and then you breathe kind of sharply until their chest expands as much as possible, and then you pull back, let it deflate, and then you do it again, then you tip the head back, so the tongue is not blocking the airway, again pinch the nose, do the breath again, up, down, and then you do the 20 compressions, and basically you keep doing that until either somebody comes, either a paramedic or somebody else who's also a first aider, or that you physically can't do it no more. That's the idea about it. You need to do first aid until you physically are so exhausted you can no longer do it, or somebody takes over. Um, so I knew. So when it comes to the survival thing and about how to kind of patch up sort of cuts and deep gashes and that sort of thing, I know all that kind of stuff. So I tend to kind of gloss over those things, but I do pay attention to them because they are still important. Because as I mentioned, new techniques are always changing, and the reason I brought up the whole sort of the CPR is because nowadays a friend of mine who works with the NHS told me that nowadays you don't have to do the mouth to mouth, that you just have to do the compressions. See, I didn't know that. I would still do the mouth to mouth just because that's what I've been taught, and you should always do what you know. Um, but you don't have to do that now. It says that you can just the compressions are just enough. But I know different ways to kind of find out how people are breathing. Like, for example, it's going to sound weird, but we had a woman who was also, she worked with the fire service, and that she was the first aider. And she was telling us a story about, it's a bit of a side quest, but she was telling us a story about the, what they call now, the shock pads. When obviously somebody's been knocked out and they have to kind of bring them back, and they do oh, I can't remember what it's called now, but they do shock pads and it kind of clear, poof, that sort of thing. Um, she always says that she never wears a bra that has a metal wire in it, because when you put those things on, because it's metal, you have to imagine you can be shocked. You might get shocked once, but you might get shocked twice, 3 times, and the electric that goes into it will then go into the copper wire, and then will start to burn, and then will start to burn into your skin. And then there have been known some cases where they've had to do they've done it a few times. The person's come back, and then they've gone to gone to hospital, and they've done the surgery, and they took the bra off, and they've took some skin off as well. I've heard loads of horrible sort of stories like that. But that kind of sort of the thing of that of like. We always used to say, well, how would you know? She goes, well, that's the thing. You just can't. It's not that they're passed out. It's not that you can really sort of ask the question. Um, but this is one of those machines that you probably see them in towns where like they're the mobile ones. They're not the ones, the resuscitation machines that sort of the paramedics will have. These ones are like the little machine ones that have these little, if you ever have any muscle spasms or anything like that, or you ever work out and you try to relax your muscles, you can get these little things that kind of electrocute certain muscles. It's kind of like that, but like a lot more powerful. I went into a bit of side quest there, but a lot of these survival books, the reason I started to read them is because again I wanted to be like Bear Grylls. I wanted to, um, be like Steve Irwin. I wanted to be that guy who was like, pardon me, who wanted to go forth and go into the wilderness and do camping, and be like Ray Mears, build a shelter, build a fire, and just to be one with nature. I just wanted to do that. I did the whole sort of eating insects part, kind of, wasn't interested in the whole hunting for rabbit. Again, I don't like hurting animals, so that part, no, I'd probably just take my own food. But just to kind of partly live that survival life, kind of experience the adventure, the whole true getting back to the roots, touch grass, basically. You know, um, always wanted to do it, and I did do it while I was in college, and I did do it a bit while I was in uni. And then obviously university being university, and then we had COVID. I haven't been able to do it, so hopefully I'm planning slowly but surely to get back into that. But the reason I'm talking about the other survival guides, apart from the one I actually read quite recently, which is the whole point of doing this review, is to kind of give you the mental picture that I do take these books seriously. Yes, I joke and I do gloss over certain parts that I already know, but I do take these books quite seriously. I know they're mostly just cannon fodder. You mostly just buy them for cheap. You read them on the toilet, that sort of thing. Haha, look, I'm a survivalist. But I do take them quite seriously. Um, I quite like them. I'm looking into getting the SAS book. There's also one that was done by, um, not what's the opposite of SAS? The American one, Navy SEALs. There's a Navy SEAL one. Um, Again, they all mostly talk about the same things, but I just like the idea of like I'd like the military side of it all, sort of the special forces, how they would survive in that situation. I just think it's great research as well. As a writer, if ever in the future I decide to do like a James Bondy sort of book or make a video game or whatever, then I can say, well, this is how they would survive in this situation. Or if I ever, for example, got the chance to do Lara Croft, um, how I would do Lara Croft, how she would survive and scavenge resources, that sort of thing. So it's all research, really. It's all just skills that you pick up through life. That's kind of the reason why we read, is even if it's a fantasy book, you still read it because you pick up on certain things and you remember them. And I feel like with me, the more I read things, the wiser I get. And this is just adding to me just being as more wiser, rounded human being as possible. So that's my history in the whole sort of couch survivalist. The kind of, but like, I read them on the couch, but I never go anywhere. Maybe one day, hopefully, fingers crossed. But that's going to give you a backstory. Um, as I did last week, and I gave a description of the back of the book and the front of the book. I'm going to do the same here. So, as I mentioned, so this is the complete protection from the living dead, the zombie survival guide, the original manual, 2 million copies sold by Max Brooks, and it's got a machete, it's got an axe, it's got a hammer, it's got a sawed-off shotgun. If we turn it on the back, we've got an accolade by Time Out magazine, a bloody-minded, straight-laced manual for evading the grasp of the undead. Then we have the blurb. Don't be reckless with your most precious asset, life. This book is your key to survival against the hordes of undead who may be stalking you right now without you even knowing it. The Zombie Survival Guide offers complete protection through proven tips for safeguarding yourself and your loved ones against the living dead. It is a book that could save your life. And then you just have Max Brooks lives in California but is ready to move to a more remote and defensible location at a moment's notice. His book World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war, is now a major film and game. So you might recognize, as I mentioned, World War Z, the movie with Brad Pitt. He wrote the book to that originally, which then was made into a film. You might also recognize the name Max Brooks. He's the son of one of my favorite actors to ever live, Mel Brooks, Spaceballs, Life, The Producers, Young Frankenstein. I could go on and on and on. Springtime for Hitler, you know. And it kind of shows really that he is his son, because one thing I love about Mel Brooks is the fact of he's silly, but he's also serious. He can do serious in a silly way, and his son Max Brooks, especially with this book, is exactly the same, which I'll get onto when I get onto the review. But yeah, so that's a bit of history of me being a wannabe survivalist. That's the description of the back and the front of the book and about the author. And yeah, so let's get on to the sort of review, shall we? It won't be a quick one. It won't be a very, very long one. But it should be a fun one. So let's get into it, shall we? Right, so before I get into the actual review, I want to do a quick side story, a bit side quest, which then is relevant to the actual review. So I know a lot of you going, "Oh, we want to hear the review." Trust me, this little tangent sort of story is relevant to the actual review. A long, long time ago, when I was in university, my final year in university, so it wasn't that long, 2020, before COVID and that happened, there was a guy in my course, and I feel like I've spoken about this guy before, but he's the smartest man I've ever met in my life, right? And I have a thing for whenever I meet anybody who's clever, who I presume to be somebody who is quite quote unquote intelligent. I always seem to ask them the same question: is what books have you read? You know, and just to see if we've read the same books, but also to kind of get a gauge of what books have they read that I haven't, that I should be reading. Um, and sometimes, it's mostly, especially when you're in university, you do meet these kind of people. And most of the time when you meet these sort of people, especially with myself, because I've read a lot of books, we've read mostly the same books, and it's usually just one or two that I haven't read, but I still add them to the list. But this guy that I had met, he was in his 40s, he was from Germany, incredibly intelligent bloke. He had his own business doing coding. He'd done military contracts and all this and that. And basically, decided to come to the UK while he was and to study what we were studying, game design, because he wanted to constantly refresh his mind for new up and coming technologies. And that thinking that if he could get a degree in it, is kind of go into that business with the stuff he already has. Honestly, I could do a whole episode on just this one guy. The stories he'd tell me about the different tech sort of things he had been involved in and done, and all this. It was just absolutely mind blowing. So you kind of imagine that I was quite smitten by this guy, that I was listening to everything he had to tell me. And we sat there one day, and even though I made him sound to be very serious, he was a very sort of, jokey, silly sort of person. We talked about the Curse of Monkey Island, and we talked about Monty Python and the Discworld and Terry Pratchett and all that for ages. But I remember I asked him, like, what books have you read? Like, what sort of books would you recommend, to read? And he noted off a few sort of serious ones, books about philosophy, books about history, because one of the things that we talked about the most was actually the history, and we talked about World War One, World War Two. Um, incredible insight into how, he was telling me how people in Germany, how they're taught World War Two compared to how we were taught World War Two, and how World War Two is taught in the rest of the world. I won't get into it, but it's incredibly fascinating. Anyway, after that, we got into obviously being silly again and just talking about silly things. And he goes, well, he recommended me this book, and then he recommended this book, and this part was around about the time that COVID was starting to happen, and he was like, well, just in case, you might want this book, which was the Zombie Survival Guide, and he sent me another book on Amazon, which was How to Defend Your Castle, and it was basically how it was a kind of how-to guide on how to defend your house. So kind of like how to build a moat around your house, how to build a trebuchet, how to um, cut down trees and basically make posts and all that kind of silly things. I love that kind of stuff. So even though it's silly, I was like, oh, you know what, give it to me. And then he was like, well, you know what, now you've got your own little island, you might want to be a dictator. I was like, oh, I don't know if that's me. And he's like, well, I've got a book for that. And then he sent me a book. So it's the Dictator's Handbook, and it was basically a handbook telling you how to become a dictator and how to stay in power. And then he was like, well, just in case you get overthrown and you want to revolt, he sent me another book, was like how to do a military coup in all these, and how to do a military revolution and all that. Again, it's all very tongue-in-cheek, very silly. But I was, I was lapping it up. I was like, yeah, I'll take it. So they're all on my Amazon wish list. So that's part one of the story anyway, my history with my great friend when I was in university. And circa months and months later, we're now in lockdown, and a friend of mine, basically, I think it was, I can't remember if it was for Christmas or my birthday, and I think she's probably listened to this. And if you are listening to this, I do apologize. I think you got it me for Christmas or my birthday. Christmas rings more of a bell. Anyway, a friend of mine, she bought me this, and it kind of made me laugh when she sent it me, because it was kind of the fact of, when even even though it was obviously for a joke, I was meaning to take it off my list, because that was one of the books. Was like, well, I've read a lot of survival guides, I don't really need a silly survival guide. But my friend bought it me because I forgot I had it on there. I forgot to take it off, and she wrote a message going, hope you enjoy it, just in case. Because obviously at the beginning of COVID, beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know what kind of quote unquote virus COVID was going to be. We didn't know if like zombies is going to be the next stage, like somebody gets ill, they die, come back to life, So she kind of like, just in case, you have this book so you can survive. Funny enough, I haven't. It's not until quite recently, like a week or two ago, that I actually started reading it and finished it. So if COVID was a zombie apocalypse, I probably would be dead now, because I never bothered to read it until quite recently. So um, I'm glad I have now, but at the time I probably would have died. So that's the story part about it. I thought, it might as well talk about sort of. I like talking. I'm not just talking about myself, but I like telling sort of life stories. I don't usually talk a lot about myself. I obviously talk about the thing that I'm sort of is the topic of the day. So I wanted to try something different. I want to start adding a bit more of my stories into it, making it a bit more personal, kind of like what I did when I originally started doing my podcast. A lot more sort of talk about a topic, talk about myself and my stories and how I link in with it and so on and so forth. So trying something different, but hopefully people like it. But that's kind of the whole point of being a creative, of being a creative soul and doing something creative like this, is that you're constantly innovating and constantly changing. And things like this allows me to kind of constantly just ramble on and just try new things. Anyway, as for the book, as for the review, overall thoughts, it's a 4 star. And anybody who's listened to last week's episode would know that 4-star is a great book. It is a great book. It's well written. It's well researched, which says a lot considering it's a book about zombies. But I would say that Max Brooks, he did his research as well. Research mixed in with creativity. As far as I know, that was me. If you heard that, that was me knocking on wood. As far as I know, zombies don't exist and haven't existed. There's been myths and legends of zombies, and there's been a lot of fables and tales and video games and movies about them. But as far as I know, in real life, knock on wood again, there haven't been any sort of zombies. So there is the serious survival aspect of it that's there, and that comes out quite clearly. And then you have the kind of silly creativeness. So you have the serious survival with the silliness of zombies. But even the zombie part isn't silly. Like even that part is taken seriously. And one of the things that I kind of hinted at a little bit but didn't go fully into earlier was the fact of what you have to imagine is the fact of he's Mel Brooks' son. Now, as I mentioned, Mel Brooks being a very sort of silly but serious sort of creative soul and actor. You know, he did Springtime for Hitler. Hitler, serious subject. Turn it into a musical, silly. You know, and that was from the movie Producers, which you haven't watched the Producers, highly recommend it. Gene Wilder's in it. It's hilarious. Still holds up today. And it's kind of the same for his son. You know, with this book, is the fact of this is a very serious topic, which is survival, with the silliness of zombies. But even the zombies part is taken quite seriously. I'm just going to read you off some of the contents page. Right? I won't read you it all, but just to give you kind of a bit of a flavour of the contents, right? So you have the undead, myths and legends, and that goes into talking about the different types of zombies throughout history. Well, that have been known throughout history, that have been in myths and legends. So you have the one that comes from a virus. You've got ones that the voodoo zombies, so kind of voodoo magic, that sort of thing. The Hollywood zombies from different movies. You've got different attributes, things to look for when you see a zombie, what they look for, behavior patterns, that sort of thing. Different types of outbreaks: a class 1 outbreak, a class 2, class 3, class 4. Actually, I want to look at that. So, chapter 25. There's a few illustrations in here as well. Not as many as I would have liked, but there is a few illustrations in here. So you've got. I'll read it. Yeah, here you go. I'll read it. Yeah, I'll read you the different classes. Right. So this is something to keep an eye on. So if there is ever any one of these happening, there might be a zombie apocalypse coming your way. So bear that in mind. So a class 1. This is a low-level outbreak, usually in a third world country or first world rural areas. The number of zombies in this class of outbreak ranges between 1 to 20. Total human casualties, including those infected, range from 1 to 50. The total duration, from the first case to the last known, will range between 24 hours and 14 days. The infested area will be small, no larger than a 20-mile radius. In many cases, natural boundaries will determine its limitations. Response will be light, either exclusively civilian or with some additional help from local law enforcement. Media coverage will be light, if present at all. If the media is present, look for common stories like homicides or accidents, quote unquote. This is the most common type of outbreak and also the easiest to go unnoticed. So that's a class 1. Small things here and there, little mumblings, but mostly not something bigger than a small sort of more little town, really. Then you have a class 2. Urban or densely populated rural areas are included in this level of outbreak. Total zombies will range between 20 and 100. Total human casualties may reach as high as several hundred. The duration of a class 2 attack may last no longer than a class 1 outbreak. In some cases, the larger number of zombies will spark a more immediate response. A rural, sparsely populated outbreak may extend to a 100-mile radius, while an urban outbreak may encompass only several blocks. Suppression will almost certainly be organized. Bands of civilians will be replaced by local, state, and even federal law enforcement. Look for an additional, if low-level military response. The National Guard in the United States or its equivalent abroad most often or as to ease panic, these units will take a more non-combatant role, providing medical assistance, crowd control, and logistical support. Class 2 outbreaks almost always attract the press, unless the attack occurs in a truly isolated area of the world, or one where the media is strictly controlled. The story will be reported. This does not mean, however, that it will be reported accurately. So Class 2 is a bit bigger, but you can't really sort of, at this moment in time, it's a threat, but it's under control, so it's not kind of really, really bad yet. So now we got into a Class 3. This is a Class 3. A true crisis, Class 3 outbreaks, more than any other, demonstrate the clear threat posed by the living dead. Zombies will number in the thousands, encompassing an area of several hundred miles. The duration of the attack and a possible lengthy mop-up process could last as long as several months. There will be no chance for a press blackout or cover-up, even without media attention. The sheer magnitude of the attack will level too many eyewitnesses. This is a full-blown battle with law enforcement replaced by units of the regular army. A state of emergency will be declared for the infected zone as well as the neighboring areas. Expect martial law, restricted travel, rational supplies, federalized services, and strictly monetized communication. All these uh, all these meaning all these measures, however, will take time to implement. The initial phase will be one of chaos as those in power come to grips with the crisis. Riots, looting, and widespread panic will add to their difficulties, further delaying an effective response. While this is happening, those living within the infected area will be at the mercy of the undead. Isolated, abandoned, and surrounded by ghouls, they will have only themselves to depend on. Right? Um, and a class 4, there's no description for a class 4. A class 4 is basically the world, the undead control the world. So in a class 4, that's when you'll know when a class 4 happens, because everybody that you know and love, I hate to say it, is a zombie. The whole world is swarming with them. They're everywhere. End of the world. Think Resident Evil. Resident Evil, um, Last of Us. Trying to think of other ones. The Day of the Dead. Um, any other zombie movie you can think of. That's a class 4. The world is over. Zombies are now inherited it. We just have to wait until they all die off, or they kill us off, really, at that stage. So if if you ever hear any signs, any one of those, then you know what class you're in. But fingers crossed, you never have to kind of deal with any of those situations. But do you see what I mean now when I say that it's silly, but it's done in a serious way? Of like, you can tell that the research had gone into it. That even though we've never, again, knock on wood, as far as I know, dealt with a zombie apocalypse, it's still highly sort of researched as if this was real. And there were many times in this book that I was reading it and I was sitting there going, did I sleep in at some point? Did I go to sleep for a year or two? Like, was there a zombie apocalypse, but did I just miss it? You know what I mean? Did I wake up and the end of the world had already ended, but also restarted? You know what I mean? Because I was reading through this and I was like, this feels too well researched to be, just a kind of, a creative imagination. And I guess that just proves how creative and open this author's mind is, because he was able to convince me that I had some sort of Alzheimer's and I had forgotten that we had a zombie apocalypse. That it must have been so bad that I must have blocked it out because I don't remember it ever happening. But when you read this book, it's like it must have, because it just seems like it did, because it's so well researched. Um, Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's my silly brain. Um, then it goes on to talking about weapons and combat techniques, um, different types of things, what you should do, general rules, training constantly, take care of your weapons, develop how to do close quarters combat, different types of weapons for each sort of different combat. So you want to use something that's an edge weapon, different types of miscellaneous weapons, what weapons are best, what weapons are not the best. Don't use guns if you can help it, because guns basically you make a lot of noise and they attract the undead. So use an arrow or a blow dart or something like that if you can. But you really want something not you want like a crossbow, or you want a bow and arrow, something that can penetrate the skull and kill the zombie dead, because you don't want to shoot them in the chest. And there's no point trying to shoot them with a sleeping dart or anything like that, because they ain't going to work, because they have no blood circulation because their body's dead. The only thing that's alive is the brain, so you just kind of have to take the brain out and then that's it. So um, that part gets quite interesting. Again, it talks about firearms, it talks about explosives, about different types of fire, like Molotov cocktail, the blowtorch, the flamethrower. If you ever got hold of acid, biological weapons. There was a fun part when it was talking about biological weapons. It was the idea of like you could use biological weapons to kind of make them radioactive. You could nuke them, but there is that potentiality, the fact of um, it wouldn't kill all of them, and the ones that survived would become radioactive. So now you have two dangers to fear. Now you have not just zombies, but now you have radioactive zombies that don't even have to bite you. They just have to get close enough to you and basically kill you using radiation poisoning. You know what I mean? So you had that double threat of like, well, you could use it, but I wouldn't recommend it. You know, um, and it was like different types of armor, how to use chainmail, plate mail, shark suit, Kevlar vest, that sort of thing. Anything that basically can withstand a bite. So you want to be wearing something that's comfortable and makes you agile. But if you was cornered and one of them tried to bite you, that their teeth wouldn't break the skin. That they would bite down, it'd probably hurt, but you wouldn't turn, because they didn't break the skin. So that's the kind of thing you want to think of, is like, how can I have the most protection as possible, but also have the least amount of protection, so I'm not too heavy and not over encumbered, that I can run and be quite agile as well as being protected. Like I say, it's really sort of smartly done, and each one goes into really crazy detail. You've got private residence, basically how to defend your home and how to defend yourself if you was in a public space, if you was in a fortress, or if you're on the run. And when you're on the run, or if you're in your own place, what equipment you would need, how to make a bug out bag, what you should carry in that bug out bag, the different types of terrain you should go to, because the different types of terrain depends on how further and how easy you will to survive, as well as if you went to, say, the Arctic tundra, or Serbia or something like that, because of the freezing temperatures, the zombies probably wouldn't go there. They'd probably still follow the scent of humans, but they would probably end up freezing. So it would be all right during the winter, but as the summers would start to come in, you can't be guaranteed that any of them would ever freeze. And obviously, even a frozen zombie is still a danger, you know. So it's that kind of thing of like, pick your terrain wisely. You don't want to go somewhere too hot, because you have to live there too. But also you have to remember, if you go somewhere too hot, zombies will also be there as well, attracted to the smell of flesh and decaying flesh and you. So you have to be clever where you decide to run to. If you're on the run, go somewhere that I think he said somewhere with open fields, a hilly area, somewhere that you've got a full 360 view all the way around you, and there's no high reeds, there's no high grass, the terrain's easy, a lot of food. Anywhere where you look, if you turned around in a circle, a full 360, you could see everything. No area was obscure, and if any zombies were to come, you could bug out in any direction that they weren't. You got to be quite clever about it. Ultimate needs of transportation. It would talk about how to go by air, and how would you survive if you was in a balloon, how would you collect water, that sort of thing. And if you ever found yourself having to be on action, so collective response, how to keep discipline. Like that, this is basically if you had a group. So if you was now the group leader of your family or your friends or whatever, basically how to keep discipline, how to keep morale up, how to make a base, how to basically allocate jobs, who does what does what, create like a secret code so that everybody knows who's coming and who's going, that sort of thing. Also the idea of who should get weapons and who shouldn't, and basically to teach everybody, being like, this is how you maintain your weapon, this is how you use it, practice constantly, get a routine, that sort of thing, and basically have recreational stuff. So don't just always be high alert constantly, like have somebody on watch, but then have a few people having fun and relaxing, and then sort of swap out and sort of make sure that everybody has a great morale, that sort of thing. Again, it also then talks about the different types of terrains and the kind of if you was in a group, how each terrain would best fare a group of 4 to a group of 6 or however large a group was, and again where best to go if you was in that sort of group, and how likely you were to survive, have more of a chance of surviving in certain areas if you were not on your own. Then you've got the how to live. So basically, this one was living in an undead world. So this is a class 4. So if you ever you find yourself in a Resident Evil situation or the Last of Us sort of situation, how would you survive in this sort of world? And then it gives you like the general rules. Assemble a group if you can. Study, study, study. Get rid of all your luxury items. Remain vigilant. Make sure that you know your location, become an expert in whatever it is that you know to do. So if you're really good at first aid, become as best of an expert at that. If you're a weapons person, be as best as you can at that. um, plan an escape, and no matter where you go, make sure you've always got a way to escape. You always make sure that if you sleep in a house, that you've cleared the house out first, and that you always make sure that you've got a window open, and that window open doesn't just do a drop, like you can get out of that window safely, that sort of thing. Be on your guard, remain concealed, that sort of thing, like how to stay quiet. And again, it talks about the different sort of places you'd want to live, different types of terrains, like in a desert, mountains, in a jungle, how to sleep in forests, the tundra, the polar regions, an island, living by the sea. Again, it's just reiterating the idea of if you lived in this world, where would be the best place to live, either on your own or in a group? And then this part where it kind of it went from being sort of less serious and more sort of story, sort of silliness, kind of like, and when I say silly, I don't mean like it was a piss take, or like I didn't take it seriously. It's just more the fact of it went from being a very serious survival guide to more of telling stories of different sort of zombie attacks within this world. And I feel like I haven't read World War Z. I've watched the movie, but I've heard the movie and the book are very much the same. Um, but from what I know about the World War Z book, that one is a book of collection of stories of different people surviving in different parts of the world during a zombie outbreak. And I feel like this book is part of that universe. That if you was in that universe, this would be a book that you'd be given to kind of how to survive a zombie apocalypse, because some of the stories that he goes into, like for example, 60,000 BC, Kataanda, Central Africa. It tells a story about them, about how a tribe, how it was like the first recorded date of a zombie apocalypse. Then you've got like 212 China, 177 AD. It's a nameless settlement near Tulsa, Aquilantia. Then you've got one that's like 1888 AD, Hayward in Washington. You've got one as early as like 1996 AD, the Line of Control, Stringar, India. You've got the most recent one, which is 2002 AD, St. Thomas, US, Virgin Isles. And yeah, like they start telling small sort of stories about these different sorts of survivalists, and throughout history, different stories about how people survived. Like you got this one, for example, December 1980 AD, Jurito, Brazil. This outpost, more than 300 miles downriver from Marcella, became the scene of several attacks for 5 weeks late. 5 weeks attacks 5 weeks later. Zombies rising from the water attacked fishermen in their boats or clambered ashore at several points along the banks. The result of these attacks, numbers, response, casualties, is still unknown. And just different sort of stories about how certain people during certain periods in human history of this world were attacked by zombies, and how they dealt with it. There was even one part I really liked to do during like the Second World War, where like the Japanese had found these zombies on this island, and they had tried to do this thing where they tried to experiment making zombie sort of soldiers. Completely backfired, didn't work, and then the Soviets came along, found what the Chinese were doing, stole the technology. Then the Soviets tried to make Soviet Russian zombies, and then that failed. And then they had to they ended up nuking a small town. This is one of the stories in this book, is where they ended up nuking this town, basically said it was a reactor meltdown. It wasn't Chernobyl, it was another sort of town, and they basically nuked a town, and they said, oh, it was just a test. This was just a testing area, and they basically wiped the whole town off the map because the outbreak, where they were doing the research tests in this small little village, the outbreak was so bad they couldn't control it, so they just nuked it from orbit. That's an Aliens reference for anybody there paying attention. Um, but yeah, there's loads of different sort of stories in here, and reading these stories, some of them are good, some of them kind of, some of them kept my interest, some of them didn't, but it was just interesting to kind of see the sort of writer's mind, where it went, okay, I'm no longer going to be serious, I'm now going to have a bit of fun, and I'm going to rewrite history a bit, and I'm going to add in zombies, and I'm going to make it quite sort of my own sort of thing. And it's kind of inspired me and kind of made me more so want to read World War Z now, to kind of get more experience and kind of see where this world went, because this was written in 2004. I feel, from the top of my head, I feel like he wrote World War Z 2008, 2009. I think he wrote World War Z. Um, so I'd like to kind of see that progression. Was like, okay, this is what he wrote. He wrote a few more sort of shorter zombie file books after this one, and then he wrote his big one, which was really popular. But he also wrote a book about Bigfoot called The Devolution, which I really want to read, and I'm quite looking forward to. But yeah, so that is it. That is the book. Like I said, my overall thoughts. This book, it's a great book, well written, well researched, really really creative, very well done as a survival sort of novel. I hope to God, I don't believe in God, but I hope all that is holy, that we never get a zombie apocalypse, because um, to be honest, I struggled with COVID. So fucking me being a germaphobe, I have no idea how I really would survive with a zombie apocalypse. But um, that being said, for what it is, for what the book does, as a survival book, when you take the zombie part out of it, as a survival book, it works really, really well. Then when you add in the zombie aspect into it, as a zombie book, it works really, really well as also, because I thought this was going to be one of them silly cash grabs. It was going to be, oh, I'm doing a sort of a silly, jokey sort of survival book that has zombies in it, and but actually, when you start reading it, like I keep mentioning, it is a very serious book. It is written in a very serious manner, as it would be, like as you would imagine it would be if you was in a zombie apocalypse and you got a survival guide. You would want a book that is relatively serious. You'd want a book that's kind of being very sort of, like this isn't a joking matter. Like zombies are real. They're going to eat your face and eat your children. You're gonna want to take this book seriously, and I'm gonna take you seriously, and you're gonna take me seriously. You know what I mean? So in that aspect, it works as well. You know, and also kind of as a jumping off pad of making me want to read more of these books. Again, it works there too. So overall, unlike Ready Player Two, which I couldn't recommend to anybody, but I could recommend Ready Player One. I could highly recommend this book. The It is the Zombie Survival Guide by Max Brooks. Highly, highly, highly recommend this. If you want it for Halloween, if you want it just to read it on the toilet, if you want to read it while you're on holiday, or if you're going camping or whatever, or again, if you're somebody like me who likes to consider themselves a couch adventurist, a couch survivalist, then this is the book for you. Yes, it's tongue in cheek and it's a bit silly when it comes to zombies, but it's still very serious. It's very fun. And if you've read a lot of survival books, there are a lot of things in this that you probably already know. I'm probably already thinking about doing if there was ever sort of a situation where you had to bug out and sort of get to safety, you or your family. So in that respect, I can't recommend it enough. So that is it. That is everything. I recommend this book highly, and let's go on to the end, shall we? Let's wrap this up really quite nicely in the intestines of a zombie that I just killed. So here we are at the end. That zombie I killed. I was a bit, well, not the funny part about that joke. It was a joke, by the way. Just in case if the NSA or the FBI are listening, it was a joke. I haven't really killed anybody. Um, but I would like that was a moment. Like as soon as I said it and I pressed the off button, the first thing that came to my head was like, "You've just did you really just say that? That's one, cheesy, and two, there's somebody going to be out there who's going to take you seriously. Because one of the things that I wanted to do when I was originally planning to do this, but I couldn't find any way to do it, was I was going to reenact being attacked by a zombie. and I was going to do like zombie sound effects, and like the zombie comes in, and that sort of thing. But I couldn't find a way to do it, so sadly can't do that. Maybe in the future, maybe if I ever do another zombie book in the future, hopefully by then I would have figured out how to do it. But yeah, don't take me seriously. Didn't really kill anybody, but zombies might be real. So because of reading this book, I now know how to handle myself. But that is all she wrote. If you read this book, let me know. If you're interested in this book, again, let me know. It is a really, like I say, it is a really, really fun book. I can't recommend it enough. I really, really can't. So if you're interested in it, or if you want to know more about it, or whatever really takes your fancy, you can hit me up on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod. This podcast is also on Spotify. You can find it on Anchor. You can find it on Google Podcasts. You can find it on Amazon Music Podcast. You can also find the Nerdstalgic podcast on YouTube. Just type in the Nerdstalgic podcast and look for my flaming face, and you can like and subscribe as much as you want. Also, if you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to give me a star rating if you haven't already. It's right underneath my photo sort of icon for my page. You click on that, you get given the option between 5 stars and 1 star. 1 star being the worst thing you ever heard in your life. 5 stars being the best thing you ever heard in your life. 1 star basically being Vogons doing poetry. Terrible, absolutely horrible. But wherever you feel like is fair, 1 to 5, by all means, give me that rating. It helps me greatly. It really, really does. Because the way Spotify is, the higher your star rating, the higher on the list you go up, and the higher on the list you go, the more people see your show. And then I don't know what happens. So then maybe they start giving me money, and I become the next Joe Rogan. Who knows? But yeah, that's it. Also, almost forgot the really important part, the business. Just to kind of reiterate what I said at the beginning, thank you again to Order Books for sponsoring this episode, for sponsoring the show. It means so much to me. I love you guys, and what I love them and what they do, and I want you guys to love them and what they do as well, and I want you to help them and support them. But also, I also want you to save some money. So again, using my code NERDY10, that's NERDY10, all higher case, at checkout, save yourself 10% off. And this is from now to the end of the year, so you have months and months to decide what it is you want. Go on their website, check it out. They've got tons of stuff, from video games to CDs to DVDs, movies, vinyls, books. You name it, they most likely have it. Check them out. Save yourself 10% off. And yeah, that is all she wrote. So as always, thank you for listening to the Nerdstalgic podcast. I've been your host, Luke. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right then, guys. Bye bye.